In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a Black DEA agent is arrested right in front of his daughter. But this isn't just any arrest. He wasn't committing a crime. He wasn't even resisting. He was simply walking. The officer's words were sharp, laced with a quiet, dangerous prejudice. But what came next? A shocking legal battle worth $8.2 million that would expose not just one officer's bias, but a deeper, systemic injustice. What happens when the law itself turns a blind eye to racism? Stay tuned, because this story doesn't end with an apology, it ends with a reckoning asterisk. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. Jason Lewis had always been proud of his life in the small, quiet suburban town of Maple Ridge. At 17, he was a typical teenager, bright, ambitious, and eager to carve out his future. His friends described him as someone who could talk about anything, from the latest tech gadgets to his dreams of becoming a federal agent. Just like his father, Jason's father, a Black DEA agent, was his hero, and he often found himself staying up late, listening to his dad's stories about undercover operations and the unpredictable life of law enforcement. Though Maple Ridge was peaceful on the surface, Jason knew there were boundaries, unspoken ones. People often looked at him differently, even though they never said anything directly. The looks from a few neighbors, the way some of the teachers avoided making eye contact, Jason had learned to brush it off, telling himself it wasn't worth confronting. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that some doors in his life were closed before he even tried to open them. He and his father had always shared a close bond. They'd go on weekend hikes, have deep conversations in the garage while working on cars, and, at times, even spend quiet evenings just watching old movies. Life was simple, but it felt safe. That all changed one particular Saturday. It was supposed to be just another father-son outing. Jason's dad had promised to take him to the park to talk about the next chapter of his life: college applications, career dreams, the future. But something felt off that morning, as if the normality of their lives was about to be shattered. As they made their way down to Maple Ridge Park, Jason's mind wandered. He was already thinking about the conversation they'd have about his future. He was ready for college, but his dad was determined to remind him that life as a Black teenager wasn't the same as it was for his friends. "The world will always see you differently, son," his father would say. "And you need to be prepared for that." Jason didn't understand it fully, but his dad's words stayed with him, especially that day. They were walking toward the park's entrance when Jason noticed a police car pulling into the parking lot. He hadn't seen the officer in it before. The officer wasn't just parked. He was watching them closely, eyes scanning Jason and his father. Jason didn't think much of it at first, but when they crossed the street, heading toward the park's entrance, the officer suddenly got out of his car. He approached them with a look that sent a chill down Jason's spine. His heart skipped as the officer's words broke the peaceful morning silence. "Hey, you there. I need to see some ID." Jason froze. His father's stance shifted slightly. He didn't say anything immediately, just looked at the officer, as if silently processing what was happening. Jason's mind raced. He'd seen his father deal with difficult situations before, but this felt different. The officer's gaze remained cold, scanning both of them, his focus especially fixed on Jason. Jason's father, the seasoned agent, was unfazed, but there was a subtle tension in the way he stepped closer to Jason, as if to protect him. Jason didn't understand what was happening, but he sensed the unspoken, growing hostility between the officer and his father. This wasn't a routine stop. Something was off. In that moment, the officer's sharp tone broke the silence again. "What are you doing here?" he asked, more forcefully now. "You know the park's closed. It's not safe for people like you." Jason's heart began to race. The feeling of dread surged through him as his father took a deep breath, quietly pulling out his badge, holding it up to show the officer who he was. "I'm a DEA agent, and my son and I are just here for a walk." But the officer didn't back down. Instead, he took a step closer, a sneer forming on his face. "You can't be walking around here with him." People like you don't belong in this neighborhood." The words hit Jason like a physical blow. His mind spun. He tried to process it, but all he could feel was the sting of injustice, like a truth he had always known, but had never had to face so directly. The officer wasn't questioning his father's authority as a DEA agent. He was questioning their right to exist here, in this neighborhood, with each other. Jason's father stepped forward, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "We're leaving," he said, his voice firm. But Jason could tell there was more going on than he let on. They began walking away, but the officer followed them, blocking their path. And just when Jason thought the nightmare might be over, the officer's words cut through the air. "I said stop right there." The world seemed to tilt. Jason couldn't believe what was happening. His father was being forced to explain himself again. In front of his son. In front of the world. And just as Jason opened his mouth to ask what was going on, the officer grabbed his father by the arm. Jason's heart raced. His father wasn't resisting, wasn't moving to fight back. But the officer's grip tightened, and before Jason could even react, his father was on the ground, arrested, dragged away in front of him like it was just another day. Back at home, the tension only grew. Jason's mother was frantic. She couldn't understand why it had happened or why the officer had acted so aggressively. When Jason finally managed to explain the situation to her, the disbelief in her eyes only added to the frustration that already churned inside him. She tried to make calls, but it was clear that no one was offering any answers. The more she tried to push the issue, the more stonewalled they became. Jason's father had always been the pillar of their family. He was the one who had taught him how to navigate the world, how to stand up for what was right, how to stay calm in the face of adversity. But now, as the minutes stretched into hours, Jason felt completely adrift. His father's reputation, his years of service to the country, didn't seem to matter anymore. The officer had made a snap judgment, and it had cost them both. As the night wore on, Jason's mind raced. He couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the arrest in his head, trying to understand what went wrong. Had the officer been that hateful, or was something more insidious at play? Maybe it wasn't just a bad cop. Maybe it was a broken system that needed to be challenged. The phone rang just before midnight. It was Jason's father, and for the first time that night, Jason felt a flicker of hope. But that hope quickly died when he heard the heaviness in his dad's voice. "Jason, you need to listen to me," his father said, his tone quiet but urgent. "I don't know what's going to happen next, but you need to stay strong. They're not going to make this easy. Whatever you hear, don't get discouraged. Stay focused." Jason's heart sank. He could tell that his dad was trying to reassure him, but there was a sharp edge of fear in his words. Fear that Jason had never heard before. It wasn't the fear of danger. It wasn't the fear of a criminal encounter gone wrong. It was something deeper, a fear that Jason couldn't quite place, but one he knew he would understand soon enough. Jason's father continued, his voice trembling slightly. "You know what I've told you about the way the world works, Jason. People will always question you. But you have the power to change that." Jason wasn't sure what he meant by that, but before he could ask, the line went dead. His father had been cut off. The courtroom was tense, its air thick with anticipation. Jason sat in the back, gripping the seat in front of him, his mind racing. Today was the day everything would change. His father, still bruised from the arrest, stood at the witness stand, facing the very officer who had torn their world apart. Jason's mother sat beside him, her face a mixture of exhaustion and determination. The weight of the situation pressed down on all of them, but Jason could feel the pressure building inside him as the moment of reckoning approached. The officer, Officer Daniels, was calm. He sat in the defendant's chair, his posture stiff, his eyes locked ahead. But there was a crack in his demeanor that wasn't there before, a tiny flicker of unease. The public had caught wind of the case, and the growing support for Jason's family had created a storm. What once seemed like a small, isolated incident had turned into a flashpoint for racial injustice, a microcosm of a much larger issue. People were watching. People were waiting for justice. Jason had been told that the legal process was slow, that it took time for the truth to rise to the surface. But in this moment, in this courtroom, it felt like time had frozen. And Jason was ready to finally take control. The defense attorney stood up and began to question Officer Daniels, but Jason wasn't focused on that anymore. His attention was fully on the prosecutor, a woman named Rachel Carter, who had spent the last few weeks tirelessly fighting for his family. She had seen through the lies, through the fabricated story the officer had tried to tell, and she was ready to drop the bombshell that would shatter everything. You've heard Officer Daniels' testimony, Rachel said, her voice firm and unwavering. Now, I want to present evidence that will tell you the truth that this officer never wanted you to see. She clicked a button on the projector, and the screen behind her lit up. A grainy, black and white security camera footage flickered to life. The image showed Jason and his father walking down the street, the moment before Officer Daniels had approached them. Jason's heart hammered in his chest as the footage continued to play. In the video, the officer's approach was evident. But what the footage revealed next made Jason's blood run cold. As the officer walked toward them, his hand was already reaching for his gun. He hadn't said a word to Jason's father. He hadn't even asked for his identification. His movements were deliberate, tense, like he was preparing for a confrontation that hadn't even happened yet. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the projector. Jason's father sat still in his seat, his face unreadable, but Jason could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it. This was the turning point. Rachel turned to face the jury. This is what the officer wanted you to believe, that my client was resisting arrest, that my client was a threat. But this footage shows something entirely different. It shows the officer's intent to escalate the situation from the very beginning. It shows a blatant abuse of power. Officer Daniels shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His face turned a shade paler, his jaw clenching as the evidence unfolded. The defense attorney shot a quick, nervous glance at the judge, but the judge, an older man with a stern face, didn't look away from the screen. The next image flashed on the screen. A close-up of the officer's body camera footage. It showed him grabbing Jason's father by the arm, pulling him towards the patrol car without any justification. It was clear Jason's father hadn't resisted. He hadn't fought back. He had been calm, collected, but the officer had forced him into submission anyway. Jason's heart raced. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about everyone who had ever been treated like his father. This was about everyone who had ever been labeled a threat for no reason other than the color of their skin. Rachel turned back to the jury, her voice steady, but full of conviction. We've all seen what happened. This wasn't an arrest. This wasn't a routine stop. This was an act of racial profiling. This was an officer abusing his power to target a man for no other reason than his race. And that is why we are here today, to hold him accountable. The tension in the room was palpable. Jason could feel every eye in the courtroom on him, on his father. The officer's defense was crumbling. He could see the cracks in his demeanor, the way his eyes shifted, the way his hands trembled as they gripped the edge of the chair. And then, just as it seemed like the officer might break, Rachel dropped the final piece of the puzzle. She turned to the judge, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. Your Honor, I would like to present one last piece of evidence. This is the officer's prior disciplinary record. The room went quiet. Rachel handed over the paperwork to the judge. The judge scanned it for a moment before raising his eyes to the officer. Officer Daniels, it seems there have been multiple complaints filed against you over the years for racial profiling and excessive force. Why wasn't this disclosed during your initial statements? The officer's face turned crimson. He shifted in his chair, avoiding eye contact with the judge, the prosecutor, and the jury. He couldn't hide it anymore. The room erupted in whispers. Jason's mother squeezed his hand, her eyes wide with disbelief and hope. They had won, but Officer Daniels wasn't done yet. He stood up, his voice shaking as he turned to face the court. I did what I thought was right. He was a threat. You don't understand how these things go, but before he could finish, the judge slammed his gavel down. Enough. The officer's protests fell silent, his words lost in the overwhelming tide of evidence that had finally turned the case in Jason's favor. Jason sat back in his seat, breathing in a shaky breath. The truth had come to light, but it was more than that. This wasn't just about what had happened to his father. This was about every single person who had faced this kind of injustice, and in this moment, Jason realized something even more powerful. The fight wasn't over. But today, for the first time, they had one resolution, an impact 30 to 45 minutes. The courtroom was a blur of emotion and relief as the verdict was read aloud. Jason's father was cleared of all charges, the officer's case completely dismantled by the overwhelming evidence. But it wasn't just about the legal victory, it was about something far deeper. The feeling that justice had been served, not just for them, but for everyone who had ever felt the sting of prejudice. The Officer Daniels, was swiftly fired from the force. His reputation shattered. But that was just the beginning of his consequences. The civil rights lawsuit against him soon moved forward, with the community rallying behind Jason's family. The officer would face not only financial restitution, but also public accountability. His actions had cost him his career, his credibility, and his freedom to hide behind the badge. Jason's father had always known that the world wasn't fair. He had lived through the bias and discrimination that came with being a black man in law enforcement. But Jason had never seen it firsthand, never felt the weight of it until that day in the park. Now, though, he saw how much power the truth had, how much power they all had when they refused to remain silent. As the weeks went by, the attention from the case began to shift. News outlets covered the story, but Jason noticed something different this time. The conversations weren't just about the incident, it was about a systemic issue. People were talking about police brutality, racial profiling, and the ways in which these biases had infected every corner of society. It was uncomfortable, but necessary. Jason's story sparked protests, town hall meetings, and deep introspection from both local and national leaders. There were promises made, changes in police protocols, new initiatives to address racial discrimination in law enforcement, and conversations about racial equity that had been long overdue. But even with the legal victory, Jason knew the fight wasn't over. His family had won their battle, but the war against systemic racism would continue. And it wasn't just up to the courts to change things, it was up to every person willing to take a stand. For Jason, the experience reshaped his entire outlook on the world. No longer would he be the quiet observer. He'd seen firsthand how silence could protect the oppressor. He realized that his voice, no matter how small, had power. And it was his responsibility, now more than ever, to use it. As Jason walked out of the courthouse with his father, the weight of what they had just achieved settled over him like a mantle. He knew there would be more challenges ahead. There would be people who doubted, people who pushed back. But they had broken through a barrier, and that barrier would never be the same. "This is just the beginning," Jason's father said, his voice steady and resolute. "But we've shown them what happens when we stand up, when we speak out. They can't keep us quiet anymore." Jason nodded, feeling a surge of empowerment rush through him. He wasn't just the son of a DEA agent. He was someone who had faced injustice head-on and come out on the other side stronger. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but it didn't matter. Change, real change, was on the horizon, and it was built on the foundation of their courage. The courtroom doors closed behind them. But the fight for justice, for equality, for a better future, one where no one had to fear being treated differently because of their skin color, had just begun. In the end, the real victory wasn't just in the courtroom, it was in the hearts of the people who decided enough was enough, who chose to raise their voices, and who decided that they, too, would fight for a world where justice was truly blind. And Jason, standing beside his father, knew in that moment that the future was his to shape. It was all of theirs to shape. Because when you stand together, when you face adversity head-on, There is no force strong enough to stop you. Change had come, and it had a namer: justice.